Jeff, you have your jacket on. Is it cold?
It is. It's about 20 degrees cooler in Sacramento today than it was yesterday. I think yesterday was the last hot day we've had in Sacramento for a while. Yeah. So it was cooler. It's cooler, windier, and a little more humid. And Kate's got her jacket on.
I dressed casual today, guys. I was like, nope.
Friday casual.
Yeah. I have the cat in the lap. We are enjoying the cold weather. Yeah. Okay, Joe's here. Hi, Joe. Oh. Alex.
And then I haven't heard from Alex today, but I haven't heard that he wouldn't be here. I haven't heard that Richard would be out.
I just emailed Richard, Alex, and John Bouchard the login link.
Okay, we got 4. It's 1:01. Let's give it a couple minutes to see if we can get one of the other commissioners to get on, so we have 5, and then we can get started. So Nick, are you outside at your house?
Yeah, I'm clinging to the warmish weather before it gets cold.
Now we have Alex.
Hello.
And Richard. So I think we're only missing John Bouchard and Laura.
Alrighty, with that, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon. This is the November 6th meeting of the Recycling Committee for Statewide Commission on Recycling Markets and Curbside Recycling. I'd like to call roll call just to make sure we have quorum. So first up, Commissioner Bouchard does not appear to be here. Commissioner Dell.
Present.
Commissioner Lapis.
I'm here.
Commissioner Kalpakoff.
Yeah, I'm here.
Commissioner Oseguera.
I'm here.
Commissioner Valle.
Here.
And Commissioner Ferrante notified me that she would not be able to attend today's meeting for a personal matter that definitely understandable today. So, okay. Kate, do we have any public comments for items that are not on today's agenda?
Yes, we have 2 comments. The first is from Bruce McNanny at Association of Plastic Recyclers. The subject was curbside recycling. APR works closely with its members who actively provide feedback and examples of problematic containers. APR will then notify brand owners and manufacturers that their packaging is detrimental to recycling. This activity is incorporated in the comprehensive APR design guide. I did read that because the workshop he denoted was the Curbside Recycling Committee. So, though I know that might have tailed with the commission discussion. And another comment was from Daniel Velasquez of any rep for the, I'm looking for the one, for the Recycling Committee. Regarding advanced recycling, please consider workshops with stakeholders involved in this new groundbreaking industry at a time that the international community is limiting the waste export as disclosed in the latest meetings of the Basel Convention. Also, petrochemical end products derived from the process of advanced recycling can range from the production of new plastics, waxes, and even to power the engines and machinery needed for the drilling and extraction of lithium for EV batteries in the mining sector. Those have been published, and those are all the comments so far.
Okay, thank you. And with that last one, I know that Commissioner Sanborn will probably be doing a response to that one since the issue was addressed at the commission on Wednesday. So I think Commissioner Sanborn will be handling that one. So with that, item 3, meeting notes. Kate, as always, thank you for putting together the meeting notes, getting them distributed and posted. Did anybody have a chance to review, comment, provide any corrections or additions to the meeting notes from the last meeting on the 23rd?
I'd like to move the approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Valle. Do I have a second?
I'll second the approval.
Alrighty, all those in support, we'll do a thumbs up. And Commissioner Lapis, is your camera off and you're just going through the audio at this point? Or Kate, did Commissioner Lapis drop off?
He is here, but he has no audio and his microphone is not on. So
I'm back on. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the meeting notes from the last meeting are approved. So with that, item 4, we're going to have policy discussion, and the agenda identifies design for recyclability, talking about clear PET, and then a policy for e-commerce packaging. But the clear PET item is now at the commission level, and Commissioner Dell, is working on the policy write-up for that will be reviewed at the commission level. And then the discussion that we were going to have for the e-commerce packaging, I don't think we can talk about that today because next week we are going to have 2 key stakeholders do presentations to talk about innovations and what they're doing for e-commerce packaging. At next week's meeting, we are going to hear from Amazon Incorporated. We're going to have one of their chief packaging design engineers do a presentation. And then we're going to hear from a group called Sealed Air that provides a lot of packaging material, bubble wrap and things like that. So before we have our e-commerce discussion, I think it's going to be prudent to hear from those 2 key stakeholders. So just seeing if that is acceptable to those that are here. Everybody thumbs up. Okay. So since we have additional time on this, it's not an agenda item, but I think we can use the time to talk about a potential policy recommendation related to the what is recyclable list. So Kate, could you pull that up, please?
is this the PowerPoint presentation?
Nope. It should have been the other one that I sent you. Just
Okay.
2-page.
Oh, that was the Word document.
Yes.
Okay, let me pull that up 1 second.
So we've gone through the matrix and we've identified
No, because we
The second criteria
and watching this very much.
what is recyclable, and we've come up with the initial list of 15 items that we're saying are being recycled, that would get the recyclable label. But we've had quite a few people, including the Thermoform group that we talked to at the last meeting. They've asked for a pathway to get on the list, because ultimately, if we adopted a policy to define what is recyclable to get that label, there's products that are on there now, such as cardboard or aluminum cans, which have been unquestionably recyclable for the longest period of time. But then there's items that can be recycled that would like to get that recyclable label. And the question is, how do they get that designation? So I think we could work on a policy recommendation that would qualify a new item to get onto the list. And Katie, if you can scroll down a little bit to the right, this is the 7 items that we looked at on the matrix to identify what can be recycled or get the recyclable label. But then to get onto the list, if somebody's in that yellow area, what would they need to do to get onto the list? So if we looked at the first criteria, accepted by local recycling programs.
Jeff, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I did send the asterisk, but.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay. In referencing the recycling label, is the other committee that's working on media and so forth, are they looking at creating a generic California recycling label so that when we use that term, it's not the industry label that the industry has used in their marketing? Are they actually working on something on that at that committee level? Does anybody know?
Yeah, so I'm the chair of that committee, and you may recall at the commission level, maybe 2 months ago, we presented a framework. And we presented a label system framework where it would be so clear to consumers that there would be a label on a product that matches the label on acceptance list, that matches the system on the acceptance list, which would match which bin it would go into. And so we presented that in PowerPoint form, the outline of it, about 2 months ago, but now that's just been on hold on discussion at the commission level until this final 15 item or whatever number item is approved, because we really need to understand how we're going to define what is recyclable and then have finalized the discussion. So yes, the framework that we presented, we put a pin on it, it's on hold, is waiting for the definition of what is recyclable and then actually what is compostable as well, because we need labels systems for both of those.
Great, that's it's a real key point in the public's eye, but also in the industry, especially if we're gonna have Amazon, for example, next week or next meeting as a guest. I just wanna keep that in mind so we can ask them that kind of question on marketing. Thank you.
Commissioner Dell, thank you very much for the help on that. So going through the table, this could be something that is used by CalRecycle staff in the future, working with the product manufacturers to demonstrate that their products are recyclable, they're meeting the definition of recyclable, and that the material is getting recycled. And meeting the minimum recyclable threshold, the numbers could be adjusted based on recommendations that we may have, but the first item accepted at 75% of the MRFs or collection programs. So you might have an item like, let's use number 5 as an example, polypropylene, the bottles probably can be recycled. Are they accepted in 75% of the programs? I think they're pretty close. But when it comes to accepted at recycling and drop-off centers, they might not meet the standards. So they would have to demonstrate how they can meet the standard of being accepted at the recycling and drop-off centers. And then number 3, for the material, is it separated by 75% of the MRFs, or demonstrate that a majority of the facilities have committed to segregating the materials. The easy example is we heard from the thermoform stakeholders, and their material is in most of the collection programs, but only 10 of the 76 facilities are actually separating the material, meaning it's getting mixed with other material and most likely getting landfilled. So for the thermoform people, they'll have to work with the processors to demonstrate that they are separating the materials so it could actually get turned into something new. Instead of going into a PET bottle bale where it goes to a reclaimer that recovers the bottles, but ends up throwing away the thermoforms because they've been degraded through the process. And then number 4, processed into an item using manufacturing input. Again, stakeholders having to demonstrate that there's U.S. domestic processing capacity for 75% of the material that's generated or could be generated in California. And again, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, with the people from Our Planet Earth, they had indicated that they have 200 million pounds of material that's being sold in California, but they're only recovering 5% of it. But they're saying they can handle all of it. It's one market, but there's other reclaimers that could handle it. So I don't think there's any question that thermoforms could meet that standard today. It's just a question of getting the processing facilities to actually do the separation. And once they got commitments from the processing facilities to do the separation and market the material separately, I think they could move on to the recycling list pretty quick. And then we looked at item number 5, that it's used to make a new product. I don't think there's any question that items like thermoforms could be used to make new product. If you look at items like the aseptic cartons, I know they would like to be on the list, but it's demonstrating that the cartons are being separated at the facilities and they're actually turned into something new. I think right now they're going to a few facilities, one in Mexico, maybe one in the Midwest, but they're being mixed with other material. I think they would have to show a stronger market for that material where it's actually turning into something new. And then demonstrating that the material has market demand and maintains value. If we go back to thermoforms, right now there's not really an incentive for the facilities to do the separation because they're allowed to claim CRV and a higher value for the material if they mix it in with the bottle bales, excuse me. So they would have to demonstrate that there is enough market value to separate it where the facilities would continue to do it in the long term. Commissioner Oseguera, I saw you had your hand up. Sorry about that. And then.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, a question that I have, and I think it's in addition to what was asked by a stakeholder, I think has been a question regarding innovation, right? And what happens with innovative methods that develop, over time. And so, you have these questions here, but also I think it's important to discuss here and at the full commission, how do you handle innovation, or what is the language that you would utilize to handle innovative type processes that come up? And I think that's something important that I've heard from different folks bring up. You know, how do you deal with innovation, something like that?
Yeah. Commissioner Lapis and then Commissioner Dell.
Thank you for laying this out, and I'm actually really glad that we agendized this because it's a conversation we need to have. I guess maybe let me ask a specific question first. If you can go back to number 2, if you can scroll up. I'm actually not sure that the requirements require that it be accepted at drop-off centers, because that wouldn't make sense for a lot of materials that are recyclable. So I'm not exactly sure. I think that might have been a misinterpretation of the statute. And we have plenty of stuff that is recyclable that we don't take to drop-offs. So just wanted to flag that. That's kind of the one technical thing that jumped out at me. And then back to kind of Alex's point, I keep thinking about the thermoforms and some of these other materials, and their argument that they keep making is, well, if you tell people to not put it in the bin, then we'll never recycle it. Don't you want it to get recycled? And I think it's a fair argument. So I'm wondering, is there any way for a manufacturer to show that they have taken concrete actions that will get them on the list, and then they have a probationary period where they're on the list? Is there any way to do something along those lines? So, for example, if the thermoform people were to come in and say, we will support legislation for minimum content for our products derived from our own products, and therefore we think that will comply with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Can we say, okay, you have a year to implement that program and to show that you are now in compliance? It's not a very well thought out idea, but I'm again back to Alex's point about innovation and changes in the system. I'm wondering if there's something along those lines that we could do.
Commissioner Dell.
Actually, so point of clarification, if you can scroll back up to that graphic, Commissioner Lapis, seeing that this was your invention. No, point number 2 there is collected by recyclers. We've interpreted that to mean drop-off centers at counties, right? Not just CRV. So what did you mean by that?
So it says recycling service providers, and it was meant to be people who pick up curbside material. So basically the curbside recycling service providers actually want the material, which is very similar to one, except that one could be, a jurisdiction has it on their list, and the MRF and the recycling hauler actually does want it. So it's tied to one, but slightly different.
So, that's kind of confusing because it doesn't show a curbside truck. Go back up to 1,
I wish I knew that this quick graphic I put together would get quite as much use as it did. It was just,
well,
the actual language is in black right below it.
Where the type of food package is regularly collected, separated, and cleansed by local service provider. Okay, and what was number 1 then? Go back up to number 1. Whether type of package is eligible as label recycle in accordance with the uniform standards contained in 7 of that.
So number 1 is basically.
Okay, so combined, it really is actually around curbside.
Yeah. It is.
1 is at FTC guidelines.
Right. 1 is FTC guidelines, which are mostly based on local acceptance. and yeah, so it was not intended to be buybacks, and I did not realize until I just saw the list that that's how it's being interpreted.
But just to let you know, when we went through and did the whole spreadsheet, and Jeff and I interpreted that to mean, oh, this is drop-off centers in counties, because most counties have a drop-off center. We went through all 58 counties. And they actually, the things that were at the drop-off centers, not CRV, but drop-off centers, it actually mirrored what was in MRF acceptance programs, almost exactly. So it was the same thing. The results didn't change anything, actually.
I wouldn't be surprised if the results were the same. I just want to make sure we're accurate.
Yeah, but I do think that, I mean, sort of number 1 and 2 are really the same. Is it accepted, really, is it accepted by curbside recyclers, right? And that's really what number 1 was in our whole matrix. And so if you go down to the table, then it's really number 1 and number 2 are the same. The results are the same, but it could be simplified. I think now, and so now I'd like to address this idea of innovation. You know, I think we really have to look at what the output is. We have to view this. Okay, so it's a black box. You know, is it an old process someone's using? Is it a new process? The question becomes: is it so economic that some investor is going to build a facility to collect enough of whatever the waste is, whatever the material is, and promise enough MRFs, enough money for enough long time such that it's really actually recyclable across the state of California, right? And so you get into this chicken and egg argument, and where we're at right now and why we have 30% plus contamination is because we've been told for decades that you need to collect it, and then we'll build a plant, we'll process it, but first you need to collect enough, and it hasn't worked. And so we can't just rely on if we collected enough. The pendulum has to swing back. Now, to your point, Nick, I do think it's a fair point around having a staging on this, and that's really what we've made the yellows in the matrix. You put an interesting caveat out there around, well, if there's a commitment to, or if there's a law that whatever the item is going to incorporate recycled content, if take aseptic cartons, you know, if they were going to, if that's a law in place, then maybe the thresholds could be lower. But what we don't want to end up is in the situation we're right now, where we're told to collect everything and then no one ever builds a plant. No one ever invests to actually collect it. No one guarantees MRFs prices and so on. So this is why we put this together, is to start this discussion. And maybe there could be phase 1, phase 2, where instead of accepted by 75% of MRFs, it would be, we could add the yellow category. So we're beginning to complicate it, but I guess it should be complicated.
And I think number 2, accepted it by recycling collectors. I think it should include recycling centers, and it's complementary to material value, because the highest and best quality material is collected at recycling centers, whether it's cardboard, whether it's aluminum cans, glass containers. There should be some value to the material where people could take it back to a recycling center. And I said before, I don't want the curbside programs to be the catch-all for material that people want to say is recyclable. And then the processors are left with a lot of material that costs them $150, $200 a ton to process, but it's only worth $10 a ton. So they have to absorb all that cost. So I think the manufacturers have to have a value to that material. We've got a couple more hands raised from Commissioner Kapelkoff, and then Commissioner Oseguera again, or was it the other way around?
There's a public.
Commissioner Kapelkoff.
Yeah.
Public? No, Commissioner Kapelkoff.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jeff. So my question is, I think Nick answered it a little bit on number 2. a buyback center or a recycling drop-off center. Those are, I think, I'm confused. Are those two different things? A buyback center and a recycling drop-off center? Okay. I know in my area, and we're the most concentrated in buyback centers, but the majority of them are only buyback centers. They're on a corner, they're in a pickup truck, and they've got a little trailer. They're not going to accept cardboard. They don't accept fiber. They're only accepting the CRB material. Now, that doesn't mean there's a lot more material that's recyclable, because there is. They're just not accepting it. Recycling drop-off centers, is that like a county landfill, a county run facility, something like that? I don't understand. I don't have any in my counties, and I have 4 of them or 5. So there's landfills, and then there's transfer stations, but there's not recycling drop-off centers. I mean, is that a CP program maybe, Nick?
It is a CP program.
I was curious about that too.
Okay. Yeah, and the number of drop-off programs because of costs have been getting cut. So they've been reduced. A lot of whether franchises or landfills have drop-off ahead of time. So you might be able to drop off. It used to be mixed plastic. Some places had styrofoam. It might have been books, but they're definitely fading away because they were trying to recycle and divert, but a lot of them were operated under contracts or through city or county programs, and the cost to operate it greatly exceeded the value of the material. So they've cut those. And it just goes back to, for an item to be recycled and get the recycling label, there needs to be some value to it, and not just push everything into the curbside bins and put the burden onto the processing facilities and ultimately the consumers and ratepayers. So
yeah,
Jeff,
what I've seen too. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just said what I've seen is those county and city run programs are gone. They're going into the CP programs. They're asking us to put a 6-yard commercial bin somewhere and have that at a city yard for drop-offs. But that would be the same material type, but probably going into the curbside mix as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually, in that spreadsheet that was sent around, there's actually a whole tab because we went and looked and found one in every county. And that's exactly what they are often at transfer stations. I'm wondering if they were included in someone's contract that you had to provide that. Quite a few are closed because of COVID though, but that's exactly what they are. And they're often at transfer stations.
Okay. And Jeff, I think we all agree with your point about maintaining value for the processors and all that. And I think that's really what 3 through 7, no pun intended. That's what the other numbers are really about. Basically, the point of this was to say that collection is not enough. Like, yes, collection's the bare minimum, but there are all these other things as well. And in my mind, the difference between 1 and 2, the only reason there even would be a difference is if a city tells people to put in more than the hauler actually wants. And that's kind of a weird scenario that I can't even think of realistically happening. So one and 2 are really 2 sides of the same coin in my mind. But the rest of it is all about the value and everything else you mentioned.
Yeah. And my concern, I'll say, is the opposite problem with carpet, because there's a mandate to recycle carpet. But unfortunately, the carpet recyclers are only paying the collectors and transfer stations a very small price that only covers transportation to get it to the market. It doesn't cover their operating costs. So it's more efficient for the transfer stations and the landfills and even the carpet installers to just landfill it, because the value that the carpet recyclers are offering for the material doesn't pay the labor. And if it just puts too heavy of a burden on the collectors, the haulers, the transfer stations. And I don't want to see that happen with the curbside bins, which I think it has happened, that every city has been focused on diversion, and anything with a recyclable label has been put into the bin, and it's resulted in high contamination rates for good material, including cardboard mixed paper, cans, and PET bottles, because there's a lot of other stuff that's getting in there and it's getting contaminated. Some people call it free riders. And I just want to protect that curbside bin that is not overloaded with a lot of material that doesn't have value, doesn't provide the incentive for the facilities to separate it, because the facilities are only so big. They have only so many bunkers and so many bins. And the facilities, I think, would add additional labor, additional bins if there was value for the material. I just want to protect and keep the bar high in California before you call something recyclable and get that recyclable label on it.
I think we're all in agreement with you on that.
Okay. Kate, I see we got 2 public comments.
Yes, we have 2 public comments from Susan Collins. The first one is, how will the committee vote to move items to the full commission when the individual members have potential financial conflicts of interest? Example, companies that receive payments from the bottle bill program, as most committee members are in this situation. And her second comment is, the definition of recycling or recyclable should not be limited to curbside recycling. Film plastic, for example, is best collected through drop-offs. Same with certain beverage containers. For example, aseptics could be folded into the bottle bill. In British Columbia, some materials are directed to the recycling depots to keep them out of curbside. And both of those had been published.
Okay, that's
Jeff, can I just
helpful.
make a quick comment, Jeff?
Yes.
And I can understand the spirit of Ms. Collins' comment. And I think we did say that we could comment on public comment. Is that correct, Jeff? Yeah. I can understand the spirit of Ms. Collins' comment, but the mere fact is that we from the industry are from the industry. That's been a well-known fact. We were asked to be members of this commission by the assembly member who passed the bill. That was the intent. So everything is fully disclosed. We all understand what's at stake here, but I understand the spirit of the question. However, it's not as if we personally are enriching ourselves. We're looking at the entire industry, and we're looking at the environment. We're looking at what's best nationwide by citing a trend. So we're very cognizant of the fact that we work in the industry, and that's been a known fact since we were appointed. So I just want to make that comment for the record.
And in the same vein, CalRecycle's legal staff did give us an opinion on this as well. And basically the precedent for these types of commissions that are volunteer-based commissions that do not have regulatory authority is that the traditional conflict of interest laws don't apply, because we don't, we're basically an advisory body.
We're making recommendations and not policy. We're making the recommendations to the elected officials that could make the policy law and subject to any disclosure of conflict. So definitely well noted. And then as far as aseptics or other material, it's agreed, taking material to recycling centers or redemption programs, it will generate the highest and best quality. But one of the things that I think I've mentioned is, and we'll get into it in the next subject with the bottle bill, is I think we need to make sure that the current bottle bill is working before we add additional material to it to accommodate the recyclability of those items. So with this, it wasn't agendized. So this will be kind of a workshop discussion. We'll forward this on to everybody to look at some more. As far as what Commissioner Lapis mentioned, probationary status, some way to get on the list. I think that's something that we should provide or think about providing some guidance to CalRecycle. If somebody can demonstrate that they're achieving 5 out of 7 in a very strong commitment, maybe it's a manufacturing technology that is going to open up shop here in California, and they could provide 10 years of processing capacity, and they can guarantee a positive value for the material, something like that, where they could convince CalRecycle staff that, yeah, this is an item that is going to be recycled, added points for being recycled in California, but something that demonstrates that that product is going to hold its own if it's put into a curbside program. So we'll send this off, and then I'll put this on the agenda for future meetings. So we might be able to come up with the policy recommendation on how an item that's not on the current list can get onto the list. So any other thoughts?
Jeff, what about, very similarly, what about, again, this might just be thermoforms, but what about products that we might want to keep on the list for a probationary period, but they're on notice that they will be off the list if they don't meet these 7 criteria by this time next year or something along those lines?
I think that's a good thought, because there's obviously some active interest from some stakeholders that are labeling their products as recyclable that would like to keep them under that label. But I think they need to take some steps to demonstrate that their products are getting recycled.
Right.
And not just mixed in with other material and landfilled at a later process. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I put an asterisk in.
Oh, sorry
right.
about that.
So it's all right. So I think there were a couple items that were sort of in the yellow, and this idea of a probationary period, I think I would suggest if Commissioner Lapis wants to flesh that out in this table and say, you know, we're trying to give metrics, you know, quantified metrics of, okay, this is how you prove it. And it'll be CalRecycle's discretion, 5 of these things, you know, how many do you meet? But that's something that you could use your experience and frame out of what would be some threshold that would be in this probationary period.
Yeah, I will try to do that. It'll be a straw proposal because it's not easy. So you guys can tear it apart after I suggest it, but I'll try.
Okay. Good discussion on this. Commissioner Dell, thank you again for all your help with this. So with that, Kate, let's move on to item number 5, which is discussion on some bottle bill issues, problems, and solutions.
Sorry, one second.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, there's 2 items that we've talked about a little bit in the past. I just want to go a little deeper into them, and then I'll run you through a few slides and then open it up for discussion. But one of the issues with the current bottle bill is we have some areas that are greatly underserved. And it's because of the way the formula works, operators just can't operate in those areas. And it looks like they're in a lot of either rural areas, northern counties, but then they're also in some very high rent districts. The Bay Area, South Bay Orange County, South Bay LA County, along the coast there, North San Diego County, even the Coachella Valley, and that might be a density issue. But in areas where recycling centers haven't succeeded, and I think it's because of the formula. But I'd like to talk about recommending that the legislature adopt a policy that if there's additional funds in the program, that they're used to start up new programs or support existing recycling centers in underserved areas. So it wouldn't be a discussion of let's help out those that are already in the program. I'd like to see if we can adopt a policy that would use any additional funds to help the underserved areas so the consumers can get their containers back. And I think the benefit will be helping get material out of the curbside programs to help reduce the cost of processing and contamination when they might have too many containers in there. So Kate, if you could go to the next slide. I think I've shown this one before, but we have some areas that have very few recycling centers. The Bay Area, where I'm out of, the recycling centers are handling people from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., 6 to 7 days a week, and they're barely making it. They have to have traffic control people. It's just very difficult for them to succeed. That's why the few that are remaining are some of the highest volume recyclers in the state. And I think that when the state does their cost studies, they'll find that they're the lowest cost operators because they're running the most containers through their program. And that ultimately hurts the processing costs for everybody, but it doesn't provide any incentive for recycling centers to open up in those areas because the processing payments, especially for a startup facility, won't help them maintain their business for a long period of time. And then you have areas that are greatly served because operating costs, rent, access to processors might be a lot less than in the underserved areas. So if we go, and this is information, I started off August 3rd, 2020. There was 1,248 recycling centers. As of today, there's 1,219. So recycling centers are closing. And as we head into the winter, talking to some people in Southern California, it sounds like there's more facilities down there that are struggling. So it'll be interesting to see where they fall off. Kate, next slide, please. All right, this is a snapshot, and I won't go into all the details of it, but CalRecycle is starting to publish on a monthly basis. Thank you for blowing that up. The monthly volume report, and they're looking back 24 months, and they're showing all the containers. Kate, if you can scroll up just a little bit. So they're showing all the total container sales, total returns, and then they're breaking down the returns by recycling centers, curbside programs, and collection programs. I mean, it's fantastic, pretty fresh data that's coming in. The current report goes to August 2020, and it's looking back 24 months. So it's very current information. Kate, if you go to the next slide. Kate, next slide, there we go. And then with the same 24-month look back, they're showing the total CRV revenue in that CalRecycle is anticipated on getting. And then they're looking at the total CRV paid out. And that's paid out to consumers through the recycling centers, or the CRV component, not the processing payments, paid out to the curbside programs and the collection programs. So this is available on the CalRecycle website. It's a fantastic, transparent new report that they're publishing. And again, this goes through August 2020, and it was just published the end of October. So to get information within 60 days, I think is great work on CalRecycle's part. So if you go to the next slide. Kate, if you could go to the next slide.
This one or the next one after this?
Yes, that one. That one.
Okay, sorry, just okay, going back. There we go.
Okay, and this is my summary of all the information, comparing the 12 months of September 2018 to August 2019, and then comparing it to September 2019 to August 2020. And what that information is showing us is that the recycling rate, I'll say prior to September 2019, was 76.8%, but in the last 12 months, it's dropped to below 70%. And the recycling rate with recycling centers has dropped from 68% down to 60%. And material going to curbside programs has increased from 9.1% to 10.6%. And I think the difference between the 2 years is in August of 2019, that's when Replanet closed. But more importantly, with COVID, there's some strong numbers in March, April, and May that showed a drastic decrease in material going to recycling centers as everybody was sheltered at home, and more material going into curbside programs that were more convenient. People wanted to recycle. They just weren't going out of their house to the recycling centers, so they use curbside programs. But with container sales and container returns, in the last 12 months, container sales have increased 5.95%, but container returns have decreased 4.2%. So we weren't going to restaurants or bars. We were all staying home, and we were all drinking soda and water and other beverages in containers. So the sales have gone up, but because people weren't taking them to recycling centers and they were using the curbside programs, that is a discounted number, the total returns went down. So what that means at the end of the day, and I think what the reports are showing, is the fund balance has grown by approximately 116 million over the last 12 months. So they have an extra 116 million in there. And at this point, I don't think everybody has garages or backyards filled with cans and bottles that will get returned and deplete that number. Okay,
Jeff,
go to the next slide.
Quick question.
Yes.
I know this is way out of the area that you're describing, but question to Cal Recycle is, who's on staff that could answer a question?
Do we have anybody from Cal Recycle?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just me on today, actually.
So maybe for future reference, is there an investment policy? And if so, what is it? And the funds that are deposited in these accounts, what are the returns on investment? Can you get us that data?
I will mark that. We will mark that as in the data request category, and then I can follow up on that for you. Yeah. Investment policy. If there's an investment policy, what is it? What are the funds in the accounts, and what are the returns in those accounts or on those investments?
Right. And are those returns reflected in the balances, or are they kept separately?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
I have an answer for you on that. Kate, if you go to the next slide. So the cash balance is invested, and CalRecycle generates a quarterly report. And this is kind of a snapshot of the quarterly report that was just released October 29th. And it is published online, and it does identify the investment returns that do go back into the beverage container fund. As far as a specific investment strategy, whether it's conservative or aggressive, I don't think it discloses that. I think it would just follow the general state investment guidelines. But any interest that the fund generates comes back into the fund. So it is there.
So Jeff,
with
the balances that you were showing then included the return on investment through interest rates, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And that's in the quarterly reports. The quarterly reports are about a 35, 37 page document, and they go into quite a bit of detail. This is just one page of it. And this is the report that they publish quarterly, but it's about 6 months old worth of information. And that's where the 24-month report that they're now publishing within 60 days is very fresh information. And the quarterly report, because there's so much information in it, it is about 6 months old. And this is the quarterly report. And Commissioner Lapis, I forget the bill that was just passed, but I think it is allowing CalRecycle to do it twice a year instead of quarterly. And I don't think there's going to be a huge problem going twice a year because the quarterly is so old, and there are numbers that change a little bit, and that's why there's a delay. But the 24-month report that they're now publishing is very fresh, and I think it's the most important information. But where my summary of the last 24 months, I think is very close to the CalRecycle numbers, is if you look at the actuals for, where are we at? If you look at the actuals for the first quarter of July, August, September of fiscal year 1920, it's showing a fund balance, 150 million approximately. But if you roll down to the projected July, August, September balances of fiscal year 2021, they are projecting that the fund balance is going to increase to just under 300 million. So it is showing that over the last 12 months, container sales are up, returns have gone down. The fund is growing. And anytime the fund grows, people look to what we could use that money for. So if you go to the next slide, Kate. That's where I come back to the policy and seeing if we could have discussion, motion, if we want to talk some more. But I'd like to see if we could recommend a policy that the program uses any new or existing additional funds from the beverage container recycling fund to start up new programs or support existing recycling centers in the underserved areas, because it's money that is paid by the consumers, and it should be used to go back to help the consumers get their deposits back. So with that, any questions or comments from commissioners on this?
Jeff, the only thing I would add, if I could, is all of the different committees are going to have recommendations that will have price tags attached to them. And so I think that this fund potentially presents opportunities when people are asking for policy recommendations. The next question they ask is, where is the funding going to come from? And so this potential revenue should be available to all the committees that are working on the commission, not just the recycling committee, but all of the committees are going to have recommendations. They're going to have costs associated. So when people are looking for a funding pool, this seems like a very legitimate use.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add a caveat to that, and that's that bottle bill funds can only be used for, supporting beverage container recycling. So a lot of other things that need funding.
Yeah.
And that was my comment. I wouldn't agree with that as someone, although I'm not in one of those counties, it's very, very, very difficult to get my nickel back. Very, very, very difficult in South Orange County. So the priority should be to get people, all that money are nickels that people couldn't get back. And maybe some people don't want to, but there's definitely people who want to. I see with Jeff, I just want to point out that we have a lot of public comments if you want to take some.
Yes. Kate?
Sure. So I'm going to first read 2 public comments related to this item and then go back to 2 that were kind of about the last item. So I'm first comment from Susan Collins from Container Recycling Institute. Container Recycling Institute expresses strong support for the concept of using money in the Beverage Container Recycling Fund to support providing new redemption services in underserved geographic areas so that all Californians have the opportunity to get their refunds. And then another comment from Susan Collins, the cash balance and the fund balance are not the same thing. The cash balance is lower for at least 2 reasons. 1, there are accounts receivable, and 2, the general fund borrows and returns funds to the BCRF many times throughout the year in short-term loans. For interest, the statewide funds rate applies. So those are 2 comments on this item, and 2 pertaining more to our previous topic. One from Aaron Rowland. Okay.
Let's hold on those.
Sure.
Yeah, Susan Collins brings up a very important point, and again, her knowledge of the bottle bill is very good. Those were the cash balances, and the accounts receivable are not included in those. And the accounts receivable balance runs 200 to 250 million at any given time, and they're running and aging between 30 to 90 days out. So what was posted is only the actual cash on hand balance. So on this, any thoughts or additional comments? Okay, seeing none.
Jeff, this is Kalpikoff.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe look at some detail. I think Richard was looking at, what kind of money, what kind of dollars, where they would go. A little bit more detail into this before I can make a recommendation for it. But how much, where it's going, how it gets processed, the whole thing.
Okay.
And part of that would be, where's, I guess when you look at the convenience zones, are there convenience zones that aren't being used in those areas? Are the grocers exempt from paying the monthly fees, or are they paying them in those areas? Kind of look at both of those scenarios. And I don't know if we had that detail of information. I don't know if CalRecycle can provide that, but looking at basically the details of adding additional funds to support beverage, buyback centers that aren't there for a reason. And whatever that reason is, if it's too high rent, and obviously there's a lot of reasons out there, or they're just low volume spots where it doesn't make sense to put those in. So if we're going to use money to offset those costs or whatever that is, how much, where it's going, and how that's going to be, detailed out.
Yeah. And the 2 examples, one would be San Francisco. You have 60 convenience zones up there, and 60 stores are paying the $3,000 fee so they don't have to take containers back in the store. But the funding provided by the state is not an incentive for anybody to open up a recycling center in San Francisco, just because of the cost, logistics, property, labor. So for somebody to open up another facility in San Francisco, they would need more support than what the state is offering right now. And they would be a high volume site. The other fresh example that I'm using is up in Humboldt. The last recycling center closed, and all the stores up there have already filed for exemptions. So they're not paying to get out of the program. They filed an exemption. They were awarded that exemption. So there's no opportunity up there unless there was some additional funding, because the economics of operating a recycling center up in Humboldt and the cost of a low volume site and getting the material to market down in the Bay Area, it's not covered by the current payment structure that CalRecycle is offering. So that's where we would look at using additional funds, and we need to get kind of a breakdown of how it would be used to support those areas. So thank you. All right, Kate, if you want to go on to the next slide. And then another recommendation on policy, and I'll go through a couple slides and then open it up for additional discussions. This would be affixed to the formula for the bottle bill, because we have some overserved areas and we have some underserved areas. So the Central Valley is one of the most overserved areas. Kern and Tulare County, they have one recycling center for every 10,000 residents, and somehow they're able to make it work. Whether it's land costs, labor costs, or access to the processor, a lot of factors go into it, but it's a very overserved area. And then you have areas that are underserved. The Bay Area, the Central Coast, North San Diego County. And they just can't make it work with the subsidies, with the processing payments that CalRecycle is offering. In the AB 54 report, CalRecycle recommended going with a regional cost approach, but with the regional cost approach, I've asked them some questions to see if they could expand a little bit more. But with the regional cost approach, I think if they looked at all the recycling centers in the Bay Area that are open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with lines all day long, they're running the most containers through them. I think it's going to show that the recycling centers in the Bay Area are the lowest cost operators. And if they went to a regional cost approach and cut the processing payments based on regional cost, I think the recycling centers, if they got less money, quite a few, if not all of them, would close. So it's kind of an inverse formula that they're looking at, where if they go on regional cost, it might hurt the highest volume recycling centers that are in the most underserved areas. So what I'm suggesting is a density-based processing payment, where they continue to do the processing payment calculations as they are. And this would only apply to recycling centers, not to curbside programs. And then they would look at the statewide average. Right now, there's approximately one recycling center for every 31,000 residents. They would look at the regions, and if it was an overserved area, reduce their payments. And the recommendation would be pay them 80%. And then in the underserved or rural areas, increase their processing payments to 125% of what the processing payments are. This would provide an incentive for new recycling centers to open in these underserved areas and provide additional processing payments to locate in those areas. Because right now there's recycling centers that are opening up in Southern California, and they're opening up in these highly served areas. And it just goes back to the processing payments make for a good living in in the valley areas, in parts of LA. So this would change the formula or allow CalRecycle to change the formula to adjust it and pay higher for the recycling centers in the underserved areas and pay a lower amount in the overserved areas. And hopefully the net effect on the fund would balance out. So if you can go to the next slide, Kate. And again, just showing the Bay Area. Right now there's 12 recycling centers for about 4 million people. And I think Commissioner Valle can tell you that the lines at his facility right now are probably 30 cars deep. And tomorrow there'll be 50 cars deep all day long. Up in the north rural county area, those people want to recycle, but they have to drive 30 minutes to an hour to find one of the 4 or 5 recycling centers that are still open. And I know 3 of those facilities are tied to solid waste facilities. And the only reason they're open is they're under contract with the local franchises. So next slide. And this is Southern California. You have areas that what it seems like a recycling center on every street corner, but you go into areas like Santa Monica, Malibu, Beverly Hills, the South Bay, Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach. It's just a high rent district. Nobody wants to give up space for a recycling center. So the only way we're going to get a recycling center in those areas is to provide an incentive in the form of additional processing payments or additional handling fees, something. So next slide. Thank you. So with that, I'll kind of open it up for discussion. I see Commissioner Dell has her hand up, but I'd like to see everybody's thoughts on making a motion to recommend that CalRecycle adopt a density-based processing payment structure for recycling centers. Commissioner Dell.
I think that might have left over, but I will make the motion for CalRecycle to adopt density-based, what you just said.
Density-based processing payments, okay. Commissioner Lapis.
I hadn't even submitted the asterisk. I typed it, but I hadn't submitted it. The devil's in the details, but I think CAW likes this concept in general. So yeah, I'm supportive.
Good question.
Commissioner Valle.
So Jeff, are you suggesting that we send this to the full commission as a recommendation? It's just a question of process?
Yeah, if we've talked about this before, this would be the second time that we've talked about it in more detail. If the group is comfortable enough to make the motion to move it up to the commission, we can get more detail. It would be something that I would love CalRecycle to be able to chime in on, the effects of a density-based payment program, what that could look like, because if it's done properly, there should be no effect on the fund. So basically, the higher served areas would get less money, but that would help compensate those in the underserved areas and provide an incentive to open up facilities in those underserved areas.
No, but my question is more about process from our committee to the full commission for discussion and consideration, and then they can give us their input in terms of a policy recommendation to send up to CalRecycle to do exactly what you just stated, versus our going directly to CalRecycle. It's a question of Okay. So was that the intent of the motion?
Yeah, that we would move this recommendation up to the commission for additional discussion, consideration, revision before such a policy was recommended to the legislature. because this is something that would require legislation to allow CalRecycle to rework the formula.
Okay.
So,
If that was the
I think
intent.
Thank you, Commissioner Vajek, because that made it a lot clearer what we were being asked. So thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Kopelkoff.
Yeah, so back to that, we want to look at saying this concept up there, or do we want to have more detail and have answers to the commission on maybe some of the economic effects of doing this? I mean, I don't know, looking at your map, I see that there's not a buyback center in Santa Monica and in Beverly Hills, and there's a lot more in the Central Valley, and that could be a demographic situation where they don't care about a nickel, and whether you put one up there or not, they're not going to use it. Where if you're going to reduce the payments on the 25 we have until Arion, Kern, and Fresno and Kings, and reduce those, is that going to have a negative effect on the recycling rate here? If we're just looking at adding a 25% bonus on underserved and reducing at 20% on the overserved markets, I get the concept. You're going to have people shutting down, and then you're going to have less buyback centers, less opportunity by doing that. But again, I don't know what dollar amounts we're looking at. I mean, I guess we could back into them with the numbers that you used, and for the last 24 months, and figure out what those payments are for the processing payments, and how it would affect it. But I before we move this up, I mean, I think we look at the details of it, unless you just want to throw it up there as a concept and then dig into the details up top on the full commission. But if we're going to bring one up, a recommendation up to the commission, I think we probably need to do a little bit more homework on the economics and what it looks like, and maybe how many of the overserved it's going to affect, and then what are we looking at adding with the underserved, right? I mean, are we going to project any of that, or is it just this concept? So that's where I'm at. Yeah.
And with this, unfortunately, I think it's a concept that we would need to move forward, because as much as we would like, I would like, you would like, everybody would like CalRecycle to provide the details. The data request that I had done 3 meetings ago, I don't think we're going to get any of that information back, because CalRecycle, they're limited on what they can report. And the response back from Deputy Director was, any analysis is not something they can provide to us. So the information is limited on the volumes going through the recycling centers, but they can't do any analysis. I have a list of all the recycling centers and all the volume that's gone through every single recycling center in 2019. But I can't tell you where one of them is located, because they'll provide that information, but they won't provide the location. There's one, I think I know where it is, but everything else, they'll give me the raw data. They'll give us information that's helpful, but they won't give us information that we can get to what this effect would be. So it makes it very tough, because they're limited to what they can do and what they can provide. So
my only comment would be, if you are going to reduce the processing payments by 20% in the overserved markets, what effect is that going to do? And the only reason I say that, because I did have 2 buyback centers until recently, and I shut them both down. And it wasn't it just wasn't economically feasible to keep them running. There were some in the markets that we shared the stream of bottles and cans coming through, and when I shut down, they were a lot better off. But so I understand the economics of it, and especially in an overserved market. I'm in it, and I'm no longer in it. I was in it. So, but a lot of the rural communities that we that are in the Central Valley that are overserved are rural communities. And they're overserved for a reason, because there's, you know, the distance between municipalities are 15 to 30 miles, and you may have one or two in those, and those small, you know, small population cities, and, you know, they do well because there's two of them. And, you know, they're getting them in from multiple cities. They're driving 10, 15 miles to do it. So reducing the payment would be my concern. And the reason I'm on this board is for the Central Valley. And so I would just want to see what that looks like, and what are the net, I don't know if we can, Jeff. I mean, and so I don't know if I can support the 20% reduction in overserved markets, knowing that they're in my backyard. That's all.
Totally understand. I mean, it would be great if Cal Recycle could help craft a recommendation, what it would look like. Is it 20% and 25%? Is it 10% and 15%? What could be a reasonable number? If they increase the processing payments 10%, I don't know that would attract more recycling centers in the underserved areas. If they cut the payments and the collateral damage in, I'll say, Bakersfield, Kern County, where there's 77 recycling centers, if 25% or 25 of them closed, they would still have more access. The residents would still have more access than these underserved areas. And the remaining centers that are open would collect a majority of the material, because the consumers would still find those places. So the ones that stay open, the lost revenue on the processing payment would probably be made up on additional volume. So that could be the trade-off. But my recommendation, my goal is to try and get that incentive for these underserved areas.
No, I agree with that. I just don't know how it's going to work. I mean, the valley is rural, and there's a lot, and they're in probably higher density markets in the Central Valley. But if we're still going to look at, you know, dropping 25% of them off in Kern County, I mean, you're still going to have to drive further. It's going to be less convenient to do that. And, you know, the bottle bill is about convenience. And I just don't want to be in a position where we're picking winners and losers here based upon, you know, there's too much. Is it a bad thing that there's too many in the market? No, there's not. It's probably a good thing. I mean, I would love to see that. I mean, if we can look at just Kern County, and they're the biggest, what's their recycling rate? I mean, is it working? Is the program working down there? That we have too many? Are we getting the higher redemption rates down there versus some other locations? I don't know. I don't know. The economics of it is, I don't know if the 25 or the 25% additional payment is going to help somebody open up in an underserved market such as Humboldt County. I mean, is that 25% processing payment going to actually move the needle, where they're going to put up a storefront and collect bottles and cans? And now they can have the volume up there. So I look. I mean, we can discuss it up in the commission as a concept and see what rolls out. But again, I would feel a lot more confident. And I don't know if we can have that information if we had some detailed economic information on this.
Yeah. And this might be a concept that goes into a bill similar to AB 54, where they asked Cal Recycle to come back with a report on convenience zones. They did. They came up with some concepts that I think we were supporting, but they didn't come up with the devil or the details in those concepts, because they talked about a single payment structure, eliminating handling fees, and just having one fee for all containers, similar to what Statewide is doing. It's a simpler process, but it's pretty complex. They didn't go into the details of that. So this might be a concept that moves up, and the legislature asks Cal Recycle to come back with a plan, what something like this would look like in the form of another AB 54 report. I mean, it would be a longer term fix. It's definitely not something that that would be corrected in the near term. I think this is a longer term fix. So, Commissioner Dell?
Yeah, and to that end, I think I was in unnamed, it's South Bay, Orange County, but anecdotally, it really feels underserved where we are. Definitely Replanet shut down where we are, and people want to get their 5 cents back. Say what you want about the demographics, but it really adds up. And I think that if what you just said around the motion that the underserved areas have to be addressed. Now, could that mean the law changes so that we can have reverse vending machines if real estate is expensive, right? You know, that works in other states. It works in other countries. Why can't we have those? And would that be a better model to serve those underserved areas? So I support it with the idea that it moves forward with the policy that we need a policy to fix the underserved areas. Point one. Point two, does this have to be a zero-sum game? Sorry if I'm being dumb blonde on the math, but if there's all this leftover money, do we have to take some away from the overserved? Is that required? Again, if there's all this leftover money, can't we just take that to try to incentivize or buy some reverse vending machines or something in the underserved areas?
That's definitely a good point, but I think anytime there's discussion about money in the program, they're looking, where is it coming from? But definitely it's a question to be asked. And it would then just go back to the prior issue of using the additional funds to support the underserved areas. And then this would become, you know, a moot issue. Okay. Kate, any public comments on this?
Yes, one public comment from Susan Collins. Regional cost data should be used to set a new payment matrix so that the payments are appropriate for each region. It shouldn't be something we just guess at and find out later if it worked or not. CalRecycle has some of this regional data, but they don't show the data publicly. That's been published.
Yeah.
And Jeff, that could be, I mean, that's probably why we're overserved in the Central Valley, because it is real estate and wages, right? And if that goes into that cost model of the processing payments, and there's a little bit more in the high rent districts, such as LA, maybe Orange County, San Diego, where you get a little bit more because your rent's higher, your wages are higher, things like that. That regional model would probably be easier to sell when you're just talking about certain areas of the state. And if there is an economic model for that, for those processing payments, and they know going into it, and it may reduce a little bit in the valley, and that's not going to be an 80% reduction, but it's going to be some sort of reduction because we know the cost of doing business is cheaper, or the cost of doing business in LA and San Francisco is going to be a lot higher. And if that's, maybe those are the numbers you're looking at, maybe you already did the math, I don't know. But you know, if it's that regional approach where, you know, if you're in this region, this is your processing payment. It doesn't matter how many are in there, or if it's underserved or overserved. This model works where the economics work. And I think that may be a good way of looking at it too. And that may be your number. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's where we talk about regional cost, and the costs are averaged, and that's what affects the processing payments. So they look at the scrap value, and then the cost or the value of the material, they look at the scrap value of the material, then they look at the operating costs, and the difference between the operating costs and the scrap value is the processing payment. So if you have higher operating costs and a scrap value of, I'll say if you have an operating cost of $400 a ton and a processing cost of $200 a ton, the processing payment is going to be $200 a ton. It's supposed to even out. But the problem is you have areas like the Bay Area that are high volume recycling centers. On a per container basis, they would show the lowest cost, meaning they would get the lowest processing payment. which doesn't provide an incentive to open up or stay open. So it's kind of an inverse relationship with the formula. So the higher cost, lower volume sites help the program. The high volume, low cost sites hurt the program. And that affects curbside as well. It's a big issue in the formula that needs to get corrected. So I think with what Commissioner Dell was saying, it might be easier just going to use the additional funds to entice people to open up in the underserved areas. And then I'm gonna have to apologize because my battery is running low and I don't have my charger. So, okay, interesting time. Okay, let's table this item. And Kate, if you could go to the next item, next slide. And this falls to the data request. We've invited CalRecycle to next week's meeting to see if they could provide some information on the effect of increasing the deposit to 10%. We had talked, or 10 cents. We have talked about that. And then adding wine and spirits, what the financial effect might be. But the response back was they can't share analysis. So we might not have any information that would help us make a recommendation on increasing a deposit or adding wine and spirits. So next week we might have to make a decision. Do we move on without analysis, or are we stuck without the information? Okay, Kate, if you could go on to the next item.
Jeff, really quick, can they provide waste characterization data on wine and spirits? Is there anything that would show what kind of glass? And maybe Nick, you may have an answer for that. But when they go through and they do the waste characterization, are they looking at the types of glass? So can we extrapolate that and come up with an idea or a number? They can't provide it.
We know through the curbside program that right now 40% of it approximately is CRV glass. So that means 60% of it is non-CRV glass. I don't think they've done a characterization between pasta jars and Cabernet bottles. I think that would be our guess. Is it a 50-50? I think facility operators would have a better feel for what that split is. We could back into it because the data is there, how much glass is going through the curbside programs, and only 40% of it is redemption. So we could get a little bit on that. I don't know if that helps.
I think the question was about their waste characterization study they do of the waste stream. And I don't remember how granular that data is. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Is this in regards? I'm pulling up.
Yeah.
So 2018 waste characterization study, we got as granular as like clear glass bottles and containers CRV, clear glass bottles and containers non-CRV. So for clear, brown, green, non-CRV and CRV are separated, and then there's other colored glass bottles and containers. So that's how granular it got for the glass category for 2018, if that helps at all.
Commissioner Don Levy?
It's on our website.
Yes.
We had a motion and a second made on the item that we discussed thoroughly. We never took a vote to move that to the commission. I think it was
on the first one, as far as providing additional funds.
Yeah, Commissioner Dell made a motion. Commissioner Lapis made a second. There was some discussion, but we should do a roll call or consensus.
Okay, my my error on that. I think with discussion with Commissioner Kalpikoff, trying to get some additional information. So with that, do we want to go with the motion and the second, or would we like to hold on moving it forward to see if we can get some additional information before moving a recommendation forward?
Well, I think that the Cal Recycle staff can get that information between now and the commission meeting. There's plenty of time. I think we're never going to fully bake these items all the way through. I think in the interest of time, we've gone through this issue several times already. I'd like to push it forward, and if Cal Recycle can give us more detail in the transition, I think the commission would benefit from that.
Yeah, and I'll add, like, what you've got framed here on the screen is good, but it's the idea of tasking, where we reframe this to be tasking Cal Recycle to come up with a plan, do an analysis, this other legislation that you mentioned, to serve the underserved areas, right? So maybe to frame it a little bit more broadly, to use new or existing funds, make it less about the funds, I guess, and make it more about what's the plan to serve underserved areas. Because I'll just go out and say, as someone in an underserved area, there's no way we're going to want a 10-cent fee. We can't get our nickels back. So until this is solved, you will have serious pushback. Talking as a consumer on getting to 10 cents when there's no way to get even our nickels back. So I would, Jeff, can we rephrase it as being recommendation for Cal Recycle to come up with a plan to serve the underserved areas? Does that make sense?
Yeah, hold on real quick. I apologize. I had to.
Sorry, that was my daughter saying she didn't have any practice today. So that's who you heard say woo. So woo for her. She had no practice. Sorry, I didn't have it on mute.
No problem.
Okay, if you could rephrase it, we can see if we can move forward. The fun of video conferencing.
I think Commissioner Dell, he's waiting for you to make a different motion.
So I motion that we move forward the policy recommendation for discussion at the full commission, that to request Cal Recycle to come up with a plan to improve service in underserved areas so that the underserved have the opportunity to get their nickels back.
I have a second.
Sure.
So that's great. Real quick, that's great. But are we tasking Cal Recycle with coming up with one of the committees supposed to come up with recommendations? I think we found the problem. We know the problem is we need more recycling centers in underserved communities. Do we want to come up with that with a solution and dig into a solution or two, or are we going to say just find a way to do it, use extra money? What's the Jan?
It's a good point, Commissioner. But I think that Commissioner Donlevy, the chair, has already reported out that he asked for that information several meetings ago, and Cal Recycle said they can't do it. Am I correct, Commissioner Donlevy?
Yes.
And just to reiterate, because kind of what Zoe, the Deputy Director of Policy, mentioned Wednesday, DOR does plan on providing some information that should be helpful. But to what I don't want to get too far into, but obviously, yes, analysis is an issue. But we did have an internal meeting, as Zoe said, and there is some information they'll be providing. And I know they were working on that a lot this week, so hopefully we can give that, make that public maybe early next week, hopefully. No promises there, I should say nothing, but there will be some information. So just wanted to let you know that some information will be shared with the committee and the public through the committee.
So
Okay, I'm on my phone because my
Computer is
probably going to die pretty soon.
So do we
Okay,
want to
Doug.
make a motion maybe on looking at the regional cost approach for processing payments as one option, and then the other option maybe being what Jeff kind of put together early on, which was an 80 minus 20 plus 125 as a second option, and to see if there's correlation between the two, or were those kind of wash out. I understand that there's, if we're going to take money out of a pot, there's got to be funding. Everyone's going to ask where the funding comes from. And if we've got a larger fund balance in the CRV fund now, maybe we point them to that direction as part of the solution of getting more underserved facilities. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud.
Maybe we should hold on to this and frame it out one more time. I'd also like to offer the suggestion of alternative models, which are not legally allowed now, of reverse vending machines in throughout the state, or in these underserved areas where it's hard to get real estate. Because it is logical to think that this extra funding may have come from the underserved areas that had no way to get our nickels back, right? So logically flowing it over there, to me, that's a mass balance. So maybe I'm retracting my motion, and we should spend some more time framing out the options. What does everyone else think?
Second.
Okay, I would accept that. I'm just dialed in at this point. And then Commissioner Dell, with reverse vending machines, again, that's a formula issue where reverse vending machines are very good. They're very convenient, but the cost for the machines and collection, and I'm just using an example, is probably 4 cents a container. And right now, with the processing payments and scrap value, the material is only worth 2.5 cents a container. So there would need to be additional funding or incentive to use the reverse vending machines. And then reverse vending machines can handle most of the containers, but because California includes so many different types and sizes, they could not handle all the containers. So then they would need to go back into the store. And that's an issue where the stores need to be made whole, but that's already moved up to the commission level. So for the sake of time, I would just recommend we table this one and come back to it next week, if that'll work for everybody.
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
So this is Kate. To clarify in notes, we will say this use of additional for underserved areas is, we'll note maybe some of the motions and then say that this is up for consideration and tabled for this time. And then what about this one? Sorry.
Yeah, there was healthy discussion.
Yes.
It's all part of the thing that's tabled.
The bottle bill, everybody loves to talk about it, but unfortunately it is very complex. There's a lot of pieces to it. So definitely more discussion in the future at the next meeting. Okay. With that, I think we're on to item 7.
Actually, Jeff, if I could interject, there was a public comment, and then I do want to, if you want to do it after this, revisit the 2 we skipped that were from earlier discussion, but it actually all looks to in regards to these kind of data requests and recommendations. One from Susan Collins, very good points were made regarding RMVs, and it's not a zero-sum game. Also a good comment that real estate and wages are key items in the cost model for redemption centers. Also, transportation distances are very significant cost items, especially glass. Again, that was Susan Collins. And then another comment from John Cook from Niagara Bottling. I thought the pilot projects funded through AB 54 are supposed to provide options for serving the underserved communities. And I'm publishing those now. And then just the two we skipped, one was about the probationary list. That was in regards to the recycling matrix from Aaron Rowland from the city of Long Beach. I am really concerned about this idea of having items on the recycling list under a probationary category. It seems like the entire point of this commission is to include products that are truly recyclable. Now also having something probationary seems like the entire thing we are trying to avoid. It will also be a total nightmare for public education. And then okay, Jeff didn't leave, it's just the computer version. Okay, good. And then the other comment was from Shirley Farriks from Elders Action Network. Your goal is to make things clear and transparent for the public is music to my ears. Can you clarify the options for where each of the materials goes so we can understand the end of life concept to change what we buy up front? If not able to be reprocessed by a facility into something new, what would be burned, made into fuel, or sent to landfill? I want to help people see the trees in the paper and the end of life so that they can see the concerns in buying and recycling decisions. And those were submitted a while ago around 2 p.m. So those are published. And that's all for comments. So go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. So with that, I'd like to move on to item 6 is the data review and request. I think we're going to wait to see what Cal Recycle can provide in the next meeting. And then a future meeting scheduled next week. We have another meeting scheduled for 1 p.m. We'll have time to discuss the bottle bill issues some more, but we do have policy discussion on e-commerce packaging, and we're going to have 2 presentations, one by the packaging engineer from Amazon, and we do have Sealed Air. They're makers of film and bubble wrap, and they wanted to talk about what they're doing to reduce waste and help with e-commerce packaging so it's more recyclable. And we do need to schedule some additional meetings, and I just wanted to toss out December 4th and December 18th. Both of them are Friday at 1 p.m. to see if that would work for everybody. And this is odd because I'm listening in, so I don't know if that's thumbs up, thumbs down. Anybody not able to make?
Jeff, I'll be your eyes for you if you want. Okay. So let's see. So it was proposed meeting dates, December 4th at 1 p.m. Pacific. Is this okay for everyone? We've got, Joseph Kovalev, is that sort of a halfway one? He's not sure. Okay. And Richard Volley wasn't up. Yeah, okay. And then what about December 18th? Oh my, it's getting close to eggnog time. Or other goodies. 1 p.m. Okay, we're good on December 18th, Jeff. December 4th, okay. Commissioner Kopp had a maybe.
Okay. Kate, would you be able to help out and send out a doodle poll?
Yes.
For the week of December 4th and see when we can find the most people available to try and get another meeting in.
Sure.
That week.
Yes.
Okay. And Commissioner Don Levy, this is Commissioner Osugira. As I mentioned, I have to jump off. So try to hang in there for, but I'm leading another call and I'm a bit late now. So I have to jump on.
Okay.
So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
No practice.
Okay. And then additional policy recommendations that we might want to talk about. Do we want to talk about stewardship organizations or grocer co-ops? I talked to a major grocery chain, and they said they might be interested in doing a grocer co-op where they get together to help fund recycling centers. I'm trying to see if they might want to present But are there any other policy recommendations that we would like to explore with this committee?
So I'd just like to recap what we've got right now, if it's okay. At the commission level, we've got the list of what is recyclable to finalize. That's one thing. We've got the design for recyclability policy recommendation that Commissioner Lapis and I are now working on together. We've got that at the commission level to finalize. And then we've got e-commerce packaging policy recommendation in progress, and we'll hear from stakeholders next Friday. So we'll have that one to potentially finalize and move up to the commission. And then we've got this fourth one, which we talked about today, which was how to improve underserved areas. So that would be a fourth one we're still working on. In my mind, we should drive to try to get those 4 over the finish line by the end of the year. But I think it's worthwhile to brainstorm what else we should be doing unless there's a critical one. But that's actually a lot of work to get those 4 finalized.
Okay. So we would just stay focused on what we have on the table right now. We do have 2 additional items that have moved up to the commission level, and that is paying the grocers and the dealers so they could take material back in store and get their money back.
Yeah.
And then support of the AB 54 report related to redefining the convenience zones. So we do have those 2 items up there, and I'll be working on those to get in front of the commission in 2 weeks. So I'll
right, and
support
actually
that.
we also have another one. So that we have one more, which is the qualification list. So that puts us at 7, I think, right? So we should make a list, I guess. But so that means we've got 7, and that's just a lot, I think, to work through and finalize. Unless anyone has an 8, we forgot.
Jan, you don't want to tackle resetting the diversion measurement tool for calorie cycle?
I don't want to tackle what? Sorry, I missed it.
Nothing. No,
I'm not in the mood to tackle anything more than those 7. I mean,
I know I was joking.
Well, Commissioner Kalpakoff, that was my goal, to focus on recycling, not diversion. Just let's recycle what we can, not what we hope to. So,
no, I agree.
Imagine a world where we actually accomplish those 7 things and what the world would look like and what curbside bins would look like. And we'd make so much progress, or it'd be so much progress if we could get those 7 done. Let's get those done, right? And then take on 2021.
Sounds good.
Yeah, let's get through 2020 and on to 2021. So with that, no additional items. We will get together again next Friday and have another active meeting. So with that, anybody have any last comments?
Chair Dunleavy, no more public comments. Those have all been published. We don't need an agenda. You already have that for next week, so that's fabulous. I'll be sending out a doodle poll. It looks like December 8th, for the week of December 4th. December 18 works as a meeting date. Highly encourage members of this committee to upload that new qualification Word document worked on today for the public. We already got a question about that, so just FYI. And then that's it from my side.
Okay, with that, unless anybody has anything else, just like to wish everybody a great weekend, and thank you for all your help on this.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sayonara.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right.
Bye.
I'm waving to the phone. All righty, thank you. Bye.